You know, sometimes the biggest, most revealing moments in politics don't come from some grand, dramatic speech. Nope, they come from a really simple, direct question. And that's exactly what we're going to look at today. We're diving into this one moment from the Australian Senate that honestly became a masterclass in just how tricky political communication can be.
And this was the question at the heart of it all. Net zero. I mean, think about it. We hear that phrase thrown around constantly, right? In the news, from big corporations, from world leaders. But what does it actually mean in plain English? Well, as it turns out, a senator wanted to know the exact same thing.
So, let's set the scene. We're inside the Australian Parliament, in the Senate. And this wasn't some kind of gotcha moment or a complicated legal trap being set. It was, at its core, a really straightforward request. Just explain this thing in layman's terms so everyone can get it.
And there you have it, the exact wording from Senator Pauline Hanson. It's super direct, crystal clear, and you've got to admit, it's probably the same question a lot of people sitting on their couches at home were thinking too. Okay, so a simple question was asked. Now for the answer. And this, well, this is where things get really interesting. Because the response to this seemingly simple question is what seemed to catch pretty much everyone in the room and anyone watching totally by surprise. And here it is, the answer that got everyone talking. I'm not sure how to explain other than to say it means net zero. Yep, net zero means net zero. A perfectly circular answer. And you can just imagine the vibe in the room, right? A kind of collective, what? This definitely wasn't clearing things up for anybody. And that's why this moment mattered so much. Look, we're not talking about some tiny, obscure piece of legislation here. Net zero is the central pillar, the absolute foundation of the entire country's long-term strategy on climate, on energy, and on the economy. It's huge. I mean, just look at the sheer scope of this thing. This one policy shapes everything from how we generate power to the kinds of cars we're encouraged to drive. It's tied to massive infrastructure projects and literally billions and billions of dollars in spending. So yeah, the stakes for getting the explanation right, incredibly high.
And Senator Hanson's reaction really just said it all, didn't it? Gobsmacked. That one word pretty much captured the shock in the room that for a policy this big, this important, a simple definition wasn't just ready to go.
So after the what does it mean question kind of hit a wall, the conversation naturally pivoted to the next logical question. And honestly, for most households, this is probably the most pressing question of all. Okay, so what's this all going to cost?
Right. This is the bottom line question. These huge policies don't exist in a vacuum. They have real-world costs that hit family budgets and the national economy. It's a completely reasonable follow-up. But just like with the definition, a clear, specific figure wasn't given. The answer to how much was basically just a giant question mark left hanging in the air.
So instead of a price tag, the answer pivoted. The conversation was steered away from the cost and directed toward things like economic modeling, job creation, and investment. All important topics for sure, but not an answer to the question that was actually asked. And these were the kinds of big, impressive numbers that were offered up instead. Projections of hundreds of thousands of new jobs, billions in investment, a massive shift to renewables. The potential benefits were highlighted, but that original, direct question about the cost to taxpayers, still unanswered.
This whole thing started to look like a real communication breakdown. As the conversation went on and touched on other complex topics, like immigration, the same pattern kept emerging. A growing gap between the simple questions being asked and the complicated answers being given.
This slide really just sums up the whole issue, doesn't it? On one side, you have these direct, practical, citizen-level questions. And on the other, you get answers that are either circular, indirect, or full of technical economic terms like decoupling. It's like two different languages being spoken.
Okay, so after all that, what is the actual answer? Well, here's the technical definition. Basically, net zero is about achieving a balance. You want the amount of greenhouse gases you put into the atmosphere to be equal to the amount you take out. The end goal is that the overall, or net, emissions equals zero. That's the core idea.
And that brings us to the central takeaway from this whole exchange. The issue wasn't that the government secretly has no idea what net zero means. Of course, the definition exists somewhere in a policy document. The real problem was that in this key moment, it just wasn't communicated in a clear, accessible way. It was a failure of communication. So you might be thinking, okay, so what? It was one awkward exchange in Parliament. Why does it matter? Well, it matters because it touches on something much bigger, something absolutely fundamental. The link between a government's ability to explain itself and its ability to earn the public's trust.
Think about it. For any massive transformative policy, these are the building blocks you need for public support. People have to know what you're doing, what it's going to cost, and how you actually plan to get there. It's pretty basic stuff.
And this, right here, is the heart of it. You don't have to agree with a policy, people can disagree all they want. But for a democracy to really function, citizens at least need to understand it. Understanding is the absolute minimum requirement for building any kind of trust.
And ultimately, that's the big question this whole exchange leaves us with. If a policy is so complex or so poorly communicated that it can't be explained in simple terms, can it ever really earn public trust? What does that mean for accountability, for public consent, and for faith in the whole project? It's definitely something worth thinking about.